Okay, so we're just going to go through some of the basics that you have in Rhino. To start with the UI elements, along the top you have the command line. Just below that you have the top toolbar. We have the left hand side toolbar, which is most of the modeling tools. And then on the right we have the properties panel and the layers panel. You also have a help panel on the far right here, which can be really useful when you're starting out if you just enlarge it. If you click on any of the tools, it's going to bring up short little clips that you can play, and it's going to show you how each of the tools work and what they do. Okay, just back out of that for now. I'm just going to reduce the size. Along the top, most of the tools are the kind of save, copy, paste, and control tools. And then along the left, most of these are modeling based tools. So for drawing lines, curves, surfaces, extrusions, and all kinds of other things. The main thing you're probably noticing is these 4 panels in the center. These are the viewports, each one representing a different type of view. So we have top, perspective, front, and right. So if I just draw a cube using this tool over here in the viewport, you're going to see that it appears in all of the viewports. So we get to see the top, left, front and right views, as well as the perspective. To orbit in Rhino, you just right click and move the mouse. If you want to pan, you can hold down shift and right click. And then just to zoom in and out is just scrolling the mouse wheel. So we see I have our object here, but you can see it's kind of just a set of lines right now. If we want to view it as more than a wireframe, we can go under the little drop down menu to the right of perspective, and we can change the mode to shaded. So now we're going to see it as a solid object. If we wanted to view just the perspective panel, we can double click on perspective and it's going to take us to that view alone. So we can just focus on this view. You can swap between the views along the bottom left, and you can return to the 4 panel view by double clicking on perspective. But for now we're just going to stay in the perspective view. Some other important things to note are in the properties panel on the right, you can change the type of projection. So right now we're in perspective view, but if we change this to parallel, we're going to get an isometric view, which could be great for creating axonometrics. Now, some of the modeling tools on the left. We have these tools in the upper side of the panel are mostly focused on types of curves. So we can use the polyline tool here to draw out a curve. And if we hit enter or right click, it's going to end the command. We also have circles, rectangle tools, and you'll notice that there's these little triangles in the bottom right corner of each one. If you click on that, it's going to expand the view and show you a bunch of the different other ways you could draw a rectangle or something similar. So the default one here is the corner to corner rectangle, but you can also draw one using 3 points like this tool. So that would let you draw a rectangle this way. That can be super useful depending on what you're modeling or how you're trying to do it. Just below that we have a set of surface tools. So this one here lets you create a surface by defining 4 points. And we have under the little tab for that, you'll see even more. So you can also drag the window out, and then you can just have it free floating if you prefer. So you can kind of move it around and place it where you'd like, and see the different types of surface tools. For example, this one here, the extrude straight. If you use this and up in the top on the command line, it's always going to tell you what it wants. So right now it's asking us to select a curve to extrude. So we can then click this, right click, and then extrude our box up. There are 3 main types of objects in Rhino that we're going to be focusing on. We have these curves, which are empty with you'll notice that there's no automatic filling of the surface like you would in something like SketchUp. So this is only a curve. We can then fill in this curve with a tool like, for example, if I type in planar surface into the command line and hit enter, we now have this circle filled in, so this is now a surface. Surfaces are just simple planes, and then you can do things like this here where we extruded, and you can create poly surfaces. So this is a collection of surfaces joined together. If we clicked on the explode button, it would break this poly surface down into its individual surfaces, but for now we're just going to leave those all connected. And if you select them all and hit join, it would join them all back together into a poly surface once again. We have the layers tab just over here, where you can add a bunch of layers. So we could create a few layers here quickly, just to show you. And then right now, everything that we have is in the default tab. So if we selected a few things, so select our curve, and right click the curves layer, we can change object layer. So now this is a part of the curves layer. So if we hide the layer, we're going to see that the curve disappears. We can also do that with some of our surfaces and poly surfaces. We can just add those quickly to the surfaces layer. And we can do all kinds of things like changing the display color, same as you would in AutoCAD. So we'll change it to red here. Now everything in this group is now red. If I change this here to something like blue, everything in that group is going to be displayed in blue. Makes it a lot easier to kind of work with a much larger model with more complex geometry everywhere. Okay. Just below the surface area on the toolbar we have solids. So this one here is the primitives tab. So if we open that up and drag it out, we can create a bunch of different types of solids. So earlier we used the cube tool, but there's also cylinders, pyramids, and pipes, and all kinds of things that you can use as base primitive shapes. Just to the right of that we have some solid tools. We have trimming, like you would in AutoCAD, splitting, which I'll just demonstrate quickly. If we draw a line, splitting works quite well even through solids. So if we draw a line through the solid, we can click the split tool. It's asking us to select the object to split, so we'll select this cube, and then we right click, and then it's asking for the cutting object, which we select, and then when we hit enter, it's gonna split our two objects from each other. By default, Gumball will be turned off, but I would recommend that you turn it on in the bottom. It makes it a lot easier to then select objects and drag them around using the arrows. So when you use each of these arrows, they're only going to move in the respective directions. You can also use the curves to then rotate the objects in different ways and manipulate them, which can be quite great. You notice that when we split it, that we can see the internals. If we didn't want that and we wanted it to make it a full solid once again, we can just type in cap, and that's going to fill that last space that was left open. A few other things that are located along the side are group and ungroup. We have some text tools. We have the move tool, which if we use this quickly, you select an object, and then it's going to ask you to find a point to grab it from. By default, O-snap is going to be turned off on the bottom, so what you're going to want to do is come along and hit O-snap, and these are your snapping options like you'd have in AutoCAD or Revit. So right now we have the endpoint snaps turned on, but we can turn on near, midpoint, centers, and all kinds of other things. So if I grab the corner of this, we can then move it and drop it onto the corner of this to be a bit more accurate. Below that we also have some scaling options. So we have scale in 3D, scale in 2D. So let's just try one of these quickly. You can also scale through the gumball. It's important to note. You've got these little tabs at the end of the arrows that if you drag them, it's going to scale in those axes alone. So if you only want to scale in one dimension, you can just use these. Also, if you click on any of these, you can just type in how much you want to increase by. So it's quite large. Or we could move it by a few units. Alternatively, you can use the scale tools. So the scale 3D is going to ask you to select an object and hit enter. It wants the base point and then how much you want to scale it by. So just grab the other side and then we can scale it up and down. It's going to scale every dimension equally. And then there's a few other things that are maybe not so important right now for you. You'll notice that every object we make is in the default layer. We can change what the default layer is by clicking on it here, and it's going to change our default layer to curves. So if now we draw anything, it's going to automatically be in that layer, so it's appearing in blue. And just go back to here. If you select any objects, you'll be able to see the properties for it, so you can see what layer it's on. So we could swap the layer out if we wanted to. We could change its display layer individually if we want to, rather than it being defined by the layer itself. We can turn off a few options for it, change its materials, and do a few other things. This option down here for isocurve density can be useful for visualizing sometimes. So you'll notice surfaces have this kind of lines filling it in. If we turn this option off, it's going to get rid of those lines, which can be good sometimes, but it's helpful to kind of see those to understand that you have surfaces. And you can also increase the density of the lines a little bit, and it's going to just change how you're seeing them. It has no real effect on the geometry, it's more of a visualization, but it's important to note. So I'm just going to change that back to 1 for now. A few other things that you can do with the display options, if we just close these out, is under perspective we can go to ghosted, which is quite a useful one. So if we move this cylinder now to kind of clip with this, you can notice we can kind of see the insides. So we can see what's on the inside of some of our objects if we have a much more complex geometry with all different internal shapes. You can also just go back to wireframe if that's helpful for you, but most of the time I like to stay in the shaded option. A couple of other important things to note are the camera tools. So you have the zoom tool. Some of these tabs will have, these icons will have different options if you left click and right click. So when you hover over, say this one, it says if we left click it's going to zoom window. So if I click that, we can just zoom to fit all. Or we could right click and it's going to let us zoom to extents. It's going to just show everything that we have. So one thing that can be really helpful is the zoom target. So if we right click on this one, it's going to let us select a target, and then if we create a little window around it, it's going to zoom to that area for us to focus on.